Thank you very much. It is very exciting to be the very first podcast on this podcast stage.
Uh-oh.
So I'm Adam Davidson, longtime podcaster, first time podcasting here. And today we're going to talk about the passion economy. I wrote a book about it. I have a podcast about it, all under the same name. And it really comes out of the work I did at Planet Money, the podcast, where I was for many years. I'm really, really thrilled to have convinced Meghan Phillips and Jason Blumer to come. They are two of the heroes of the book I wrote. And I went on a real journey of trying to find folks who were doing this thing that I came to call the passion economy, that I found a really great way to live a life in this economy, and a time when there's so much scary, dark stuff about what's happening to our economic futures, and so I want to dig in, and I was really excited to get these guys to come here to South by to talk about it. We were going to do this event 2 years ago, and it was put off. My book came out 2 years ago, but I actually would guess that a lot of the themes we were going to talk about then actually feel infinitely more relevant today. That the last crazy 2 years of our lives have forced a lot of us to ask the fundamental questions that these guys have been asking for many years, and that the book asks. It's all about, I'm going to give you the very quick economic theory, and then we'll actually get into the human conversation. So the core idea that I at first wrestled with as a mystery, and it was really meeting Jason, I don't know, 12 years ago, 14 years ago,
Yeah,
a while ago.
Yeah, something like
that right in the waning days of the financial crisis, where I was like, oh, wow, this thing is actually possible. So the basic idea goes like this. For most of human history, commerce, selling, buying, happened in, for the most part, in very intimate ways. You bought stuff, bread, cloth, soap, from neighbors. And those neighbors, probably their grandparents, were selling stuff to your grandparents. And there wasn't a lot of variety. There wasn't a lot of choice. You know, you were in your village, and this is the bread we eat in our village, and this is the cheese we eat. There was a tiny, tiny world of high-end luxury goods that would be shipped long distances. But even those would be sold in very specific contextual ways. So there was enormous intimacy in the world of commerce, but there was very little scale. You couldn't, if you were an amazing bread maker in a neighborhood in Brooklyn or a village in France, you couldn't ship your bread even to the next village probably, but certainly not to another county or another state or another country. So then along comes the 20th century, and that upends everything. For the first time in human history, people are buying the vast majority of the things they're buying from folks who made them very, very far away. And so you now have massive scale. You can be a company in Chicago and sell items to people all over the world. So you have scale, but you've lost that intimacy. You've lost that deep connection. So if you're Snickers or Wonder Bread or whatever it might be, you may possibly have a sense of broad demographic categories. Dove chocolate is more likely to be sold to women than men, and more likely to be sold to people over 35 than under 35, that kind of thing. But you've really lost that deep intimacy. And what I would argue, and these folks' lives tell us, is that today, sort of paradoxically, the very things that destroyed much of the 20th century or ripped apart the system, global trade, the internet, artificial intelligence, actually create a sort of bifurcated economy where scale is still working. There's scalier scale than ever. So, you can be an entrepreneur with 6 or a dozen people, and you can create a multi-billion-dollar company like Instagram. Have you heard of Instagram, by the way?
I have heard of Instagram.
Yeah. A young South by staffer was condescendingly explaining to Jason what Instagram
TikTok.
and
I've
TikTok
got
are.
it.
What
Yeah.
It
TikTok.
took a little bit, and then
Yeah.
they had to help me with TikTok. So.
So, a staff of 12 create an app that reaches billions of people. So scale is working great, but intimacy is also working great, and that's what we're going to talk about. And what I see as a huge opportunity that I do think, I certainly wouldn't argue everyone has access to, but a lot of people have access to, is a business life built around creating products or services that reach a small group of people. Depending on your industry, that might be 12 people, that might be 12 million people, but not trying to get everybody, but reaching them with passion, where it is your passion and their passion that are meeting together. Now, this isn't easy to do, as we're going to discuss. It's not, the argument here is not do whatever you feel like you'll make a fortune. It's a little tricky. And you have to spend some time in the wilderness, probably. But that's the core idea of the passion economy, that before the Industrial Revolution, we had intimacy without scale. After the Industrial Revolution, scale without intimacy. Now you can actually have intimacy at scale. And really this was like some abstract ideas that I was discussing with a group of economists when I met Jason Blumer, maybe 2009, I want to say. It might have been 2010.
Maybe.
Who is, if you met Jason in, say, 2002, he would have possibly won the award for least likely to inspire you to transform your life.
That's awesome.
So why don't you tell us who you were?
So with that introduction,
With that introduction, tell us about your boring ass life in 2002.
here's why I suck, right? So,
Used to.
No, used to, right? Until Adam came into my life.
No,
so.
not at all.
So I run a CPA firm, and so have done that for, I've done it for 2 decades. So been in that profession for 30 years. And so a lot of you probably know accountants. So you have the stereotype, and it's probably actually accurate, which is a generalist mindset, right, of very transactional, very commodity-based type of life. And something happened to me. In college, I was in rock bands, and I needed to pick a major, so my dad was an accountant, so I picked it. I didn't know what it was. So that's the life I came from, and then got into the world of accounting.
And we should note that your dad hated being an accountant.
Right, yeah. He was the typical accountant. But something happened when I started working. I got into the accountant mindset, and really at some point I learned that I don't have to live this way. I get to be creative. I get to make choices about what I want to do, how I want to do it. And so niching became really an avenue towards that, which was...
But Jason, if I can I always tell Jason I feel like I tell his story better than he does personally. I am his number one hype man. But so, Jason, you had the standard boring accountant job. There are accountants who do all sorts of things, but what you were doing was at an okay but not exceptional firm in upstate South Carolina. You were doing taxes, audits, payroll for a bunch of perfectly fine companies.
Right.
And what you told me is nobody wanted your service. There's nobody here who's like, you know what I'm going to really want for my birthday? An audit. I'm going to hire. And you didn't want to do any of that.
Yeah. I was
And
making
so
a living.
you were like, wow, I have a whole career, and you were doing okay,
Yeah.
where I do stuff they don't want, and I don't want. Nobody wants.
Right.
But
I'm getting paid.
someone has to
Right.
do it, but you get paid.
Right, getting paid.
And your boss is assessing you by a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
How many hours a day are you billing?
Yeah.
And what's your billing rate? And that's it.
Yeah.
And you were like, but what if people loved what I did? And what if I loved what I did?
Yeah. Well, and so that was kind of the turning point, is really to narrow down into markets that could love what we do for them. And so we dove into the creative digital marketing agency space and started learning about these clients. We had an office in South Carolina, a small one, me and my dad, and maybe a couple other employees. Started getting smaller designers on other sides of the country, which blew my mind, back in, 2008 or whatever, why anybody would hire us. And so then I was like, wait, that's weird. And so just went through the process of closing the office, focusing solely on that part of the work that we do, and really starting to learn how to consult and change the lives of the people that we work with. Because I realized I was an entrepreneur, which is just somebody who carries the full weight, of the future of their work on their shoulders. They have to figure out everything. And so other people were doing that too. And so what we found through niching is people could delight in the way we transformed them through helping them run their business with more clarity, and things like that. And so, and that's how I met Meghan it was on Twitter, 2009 or something, right?
The only time I've ever been on Twitter. I was desperate in the middle of the night, and I'm the one that was, how do I run a business that's charging by the hour? And I need more hours in the day. So I felt looking at hashtags of creative CPAs, I found Jason in the middle of the night on Twitter. Oh. And that is how the story has all unfolded from there.
But you're a master, Meghan. You're a master at, because your story, which we'll get into, is is making commodities. Beautifully valuable.
Let me just share, because actually in researching Jason, I also learned a lot about the history of accounting, which was actually way more fascinating than I expected.
than Jason.
No, not at all. And there's actually a real argument that in the 19th century, we've heard so much about the great inventions of the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine and the spinning jenny or whatever. I still don't know what it is, but it's very important.
Cotton gin.
And
right?
cotton gin. But economic historians really point to some major accounting breakthroughs as more important or as important as those physical inventions. Because if you think about the world before the 1800s, the average business did one transformation. They bought cotton and turned it into thread, or they bought thread and turned it in and weaved it into a textile, or they just traded. They bought something here and sold it there. And when you do one transformation, the accounting's sort of baked in. You know what you paid for it, you know what you sold it for, and that's your profit. But for the very first time, we had large companies doing multiple steps, and where maybe you buy cotton, and then you're doing 7 or 8 different things, and there's a garment on the other side, and you could sell the garment for a lot more than the raw material and lose all your money. And you don't know why, you don't know where. And that was actually a major problem. The first vertically integrated factory in America, the Lowell plant in Lowell, Massachusetts, well, Waltham originally, the point I always like to make is it took them a year to figure out how to get 7 machines running off the same water wheel. The engineering challenge took them a year. It took them 8 years to figure out how to count what was happening and make sure they were profitable. And accounting was really this heroic profession, and then became commoditized certainly by the late 1800s, but really after the Great Depression, accounting became about following rules. And so an accountant just had a tool set, and that's it. And they were kind of by design interchangeable. And you really found a way to not be interchangeable.
Yeah.
There's a group of people where you are the best person in the world to work with. And then there's a much larger group of people where you would not be the right person to work with. That's the whole point. Yeah. So, and that group of people is creative folks. And Meghan, you are such a perfect example. So Meghan, and I'm guessing this is a very common story at South by Southwest, You are a very creative marketing professional. I've been with you. I've flown out to Sacramento. We spent an awesome week in Napa, not Napa, in Sonoma, going to wineries. And you're amazing at going to a passionate food or agricultural-based business, really helping them figure out their essence and then figuring out how to share that essence in everything from a logo or a website to really how do you get that storytelling embedded in their whole business. You're really good at that, but you were really terrible at running a profitable company.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where the middle of the night, how do I make money doing this? And I think a lot of us who are creatives are just very passionate about what we do, and we want to help and do design and create a better environment for a lot of our clients. But the hourly model was not going to work when you're growing, and I just needed to figure out a way to flip that. And so I called Jason on Twitter and said, "Can I fly you to California?" And he flew out. I didn't know who he was. He didn't know who I was, for that matter. And then I was still broke, so I said I rented a room, but I really borrowed a photography studio in a basement that had no windows. And I told him, we need to figure out how I can make money at this.
Pretty depressing. Pretty depressing.
It was
setting.
a really
We've been
depressing setting.
Stuck in the basement.
We were in
And
a
to be
basement.
clear, you were, to an outside observer, you were killing it. You had a brand new agency. You had tons of clients.
Yeah.
You were working round the clock
By the hour.
and losing money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to be fair, Honey had already niched. We have a very big sort of expertise in food, beverage, agriculture, and now cannabis. Thank you, California. So we wanted to keep niching in that environment and to make sure that we were bringing great storytelling and intimacy to food and beverage. But intimacy means research and time and effort that we were not billing for. So Jason flies out and he was like, "You are a train wreck." And he's like, "You can't keep charging the way you're charging. We are going to flip all your proposals and change everything." And so that's when in 2012, I think, or no, 13, we started to do value pricing. So instead of charging by the hour, we simply share a proposal and we give an all-inclusive look to the way we provide intimacy and value to a pretty much commodity-based industry. Wine, nuts, prunes, all commodities. But we layer on so much of that storytelling and research that there needed to be more value added to it. And so that's really kind of where we all have come into play is Adam's like, "Give me an example of someone doing this." And that was sort of, you flew to California and I gave you wine.
Yeah, it was pretty great.
Yeah, it was great.
And the book it's a storytelling masterpiece, which is Adam's skill, and he covered us in a chapter of the book.
Well, we each got a chapter.
Yeah, each got a chapter.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty cool, deep story.
Yeah, and
the
one thing I love about the story of the two of you, and I would throw myself in there as well, is in a sense, one of the ways all of us make money now is by guiding other people through this journey. Like you, and I do want to get a little bit into how your firm works. I've been your client as well as your friend, as well as your biographer and hype man. So, but I just want to kind of call out a few themes here. We've heard about accounting and food and wine, but I have learned this story exists in I don't know if I can say every industry, but I can't think of an industry I've found where it doesn't work. From business to business, industrial industries to others, where for a host of reasons, over the 20th century, some set of products and services were really commoditized, by which I mean interchangeable. And people were able to sell, often based on just geographic, if you were in a town, there was, depending on the size of the town, there were 3 accountants or 12 accountants or whatever. Maybe in a big city, there'd be somewhat, accountants who specialize in a certain industry or other. But it just would have been irrational in the 1920s or even the 1990s for an accountant in Greenville, South Carolina to say, I'm only working with creative businesses, because how many are there in Greenville, South Carolina? You had to do everybody. And so, and this idea of hourly billing is both a great example of and a metaphor for how the commoditized economy works, where the conversation over how you actually get money, how much money you're going to be paid for your product or service, is outside of you and really outside of the client. It's something that's established in the marketplace. So accountants make X dollars an hour. Now, it's utterly absurd when you think about it for half a second. Even if you really need an accountant, you're not thinking, boy, I really need 3 hours and 26 minutes of an accountant. Like, you just want your problem solved. And it's not, there's a whole bunch of things you want, actually. You want the specific problem solved, but you also probably want to feel empowered. You want to feel like you have some agency over your life. Or maybe you don't. Maybe you want an accountant who can just take care of everything and you can trust them implicitly. There's lots of different ways of imagining the relationship between an accountant and how each and every one of us would value those services. But we're shoved into this commodity market. The same with agriculture. That, and I think most of us, looking around. Some are my age, where you remember when tomatoes were one thing and they weren't particularly good, and you just got a tomato, and it was kind of mushy and gross. That's the world of commodity. There's something that's fine but not great, and everyone gets it, and that's it. You get Ivory soap, or you get a mushy tomato. But each of us have different tomato needs, we have different accounting needs, we have different graphic design needs, we have all sorts of different needs, and we value them in all sorts of different ways, maybe at different times of our life, and different moments of the day. So, so figuring out pricing is not just about how much do I charge, it's about really understanding that in the passion economy, you're not selling a unit that's been defined externally. You're selling a unit that you and your customer are valuing in a specific way. And Jason, you've taught me over and over again that it comes down to niching. I do want to just say one thing, because I say this every time I talk to you. For years,
I know what you're going to say.
Jason has said niching, and me, being the far better educated NPR, New York Times, New Yorker veteran, would say, no, it's niching. And then one day I looked it up, and it's niching. And like 80 years ago, some pretentious people in the Northeast started saying niching because we thought that was right, but it's always been niching. It's an old English word, and it's niching. So talk to me about what is a niche. And I love your phrase, you can never niche. It's hard for me to say. You can never niche too narrowly, although you can niche too quickly.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and by the way, you can do Q&A. We want to take some Q&A at the end, right? So,
yes, so there's...
Yeah, so if you're thinking about questions, you can pop them in the app.
We just don't know.
Yeah, the South by Southwest Go app.
So yeah, I guess niching is the road we went down in our own journey, which is really the search to become an expert. That's what. So basically, if you niche, that is, if you narrow in a market, a vertical market, horizontal niching, there's a lot of different ways you can narrow around who you serve in a market. You do it with the basis of being an expert, that you have a right to choose only a certain narrow market to serve in. And sometimes that's a little aspirational in your choice to narrow. You think, I can do this for just that particular group. You find it's a different business model, really, is what you're doing. You think you're doing some cool marketing thing. You're actually starting a whole new business where you're starting to become more intimate with people. You start to have to persuade them a little bit more about their value. You talk a lot about trust. And then you find, at least in the services business, the accounting profession, generally they'll have 400 or 500 clients. And maybe 80% of those are just individual tax returns. That's just kind of how that model works, and it becomes a machine. Well, our firm and my partners here today, we have about 13 team members, and we have 30 clients. And so it's a completely different model, which you can tell it's an intimate model. It's a more intimate model. So all of those clients are paying you a lot more money.
Because you actually make more now from 13 clients
Right.
than you did with 400
That's right.
clients.
That's right. And we transform firms too. We help them transform, which is always about safely narrowing, lowering their client count so that your client base becomes a strategic foundation that you operate on. You've chosen each client, and that's what you do. Firms choose their clients. The clients don't choose you. You make choices as to who you'll serve and the prices that needs to be done. And that's really the model. And so transforming your firm from that, from just a commodity-based transactional business to a narrow expert-based business model is a hard turn, which is, and Meghan, you were well into it. But we had to get the economics to work.
Absolutely.
Because like you say, we tell people that you can't niche too narrowly, too deeply into a market, but you can do it too quickly. And so it's a very methodical move you have to make. And often if you have one type of business and you move to a narrow-based, niche-based business, a high-value-based business, it could be 2 to 3 year turn. And you have to do it very, very carefully and very methodically because it takes cutting and removing clients and replacing those clients. And so Meghan she did it. And it's freaking gut-wrenching work. And few will do it. So a lot of people come to us and say, I want to do it, and they can't muster the risk it takes. And it is a massive risk. It's very emotional to do it. I did it and completely wrecked things. I destroyed my business. And so I guess, Meghan, would you say we entered your life to do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
You had niched because you had the expertise, but the economics
Well, I think about
working.
I think about the passion economy now that Adam has so eloquently defined it, and I don't think we knew exactly what it was when you came to California and sat in a basement with me. It was more along the lines of, I just believe in food, I believe in the story, and I believe that our farmers need to not get into a homogenized, monopolized food system. But I knew that in my heart, but I didn't know how to charge for it. And I wanted to actually pay that mentality and passion forward. And when I think about the passion economy today, I think it's twofold. It's one, my firm is more valued because we bring this intimacy in a way that they know we care and they trust, and there's going to be a long-term relationship. And speaking of working in food and beverage and agriculture for the past 2 years, it has not been easy. Like, that trust that we've had to break through a lot of hardships the past 2 years. But then also, it changed the way we hired. It changed our culture completely because I needed people who worked at my firm who had the exact same passion that we were kind of putting on a North Star. Because no one would hire us if it was going to be a transactional sort of marketing and design proposal. It would be, yes, I can take your chocolate to market, and yes, I can figure out where you're going to be on the shelf, or I can give a shit and actually care that you source your beans from a certain place, and you have sustainable packaging, and you are looking to have a really, sustainable company, and we have to tell that story so that your brand isn't being sold as a chocolate bar for $1, but your brand is being sold as a chocolate bar for $5. And that's sort of, when I think about that, it's a sort of a marriage of both like internal passion, but then externally giving it value so that we can truly help business in a way that is fundamentally, it feels good. It feels better to not be a transaction, I guess, is really what it is at the end of the day.
But I would say it's not just that it feels like what I think you realized is that, much like Jason, you're not just a marketing consultant like, oh, you need a logo, I'll give you a logo. Yep. There's 20 different people who could give you a logo, I'm one of them.
Yep.
Because then you're inevitably heading towards just a lowest common denominator discussion of price. But what you have done, because I've seen you do it, I've been in the room, is help your clients understand how their choices around marketing actually impact the very value that they're creating for their customers. So you're expanding the size of the pie. It's not extractive. It's not like, oh, our budget is this, we have 50 grand for marketing. If we could get you down to 40, that frees up some money you're actually, let's leave that conversation aside. And it's very much not extractive. I remember the day I was fully sold on Jason's model was I talked to one of his clients, because I was in the beginning, I was a little skeptical of this idea that you can make more money from 13 people or 13 companies than 400 and everyone's happy. That seemed like extractive. But I remember talking to one of your clients. Was he in Austin? He was in Texas. I can't remember where in Texas.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
Maybe he's here. And he said, it's the biggest bill my company pays each month, and it's the only bill I'm really happy to pay. Because you've done it for me. I've hired you, and you've helped me. It's a fundamental rethink of how to think about who my audience is, how that works.
Yeah. It's but it's not easy.
Yeah, we're talking about
It's
this.
not easy. In fact, I just started a new business this year, and I was telling them, like, I wrote the book, I'm preaching it, and I was like, I don't want to niche. I want to reach everybody because I don't want to turn anyone down. I want to just say yes. Like, who wants to say no to clients? Yeah. So this idea of niching, it's a profound and complex idea because you can, it could be industrial, it could be a type of client. But one of the ideas that I'm really embracing is and this is something you taught me, Jason, is when you're the key thing to having a true value conversation with a client where the pricing is rooted in the value you're able to create, the key thing is who's in that room. That
Right.
99% of potential clients are never going to be able to have that conversation. And so you actually do a ton of work to make sure that there's a really narrow gate on that room so that you're only sitting across from people who are open to having that conversation.
Yeah, well, I think that's probably one of the most important aspects to running a business with more of this passion mentality, this intention, I guess, or purpose, is to really stop spending time with the wrong people. Because we all know how heavy it is to work with clients who just aren't invested in a relationship with you, and it's just really scary. It's scary to do because especially if you're an entrepreneur, you run a business. All you can think of is I need to make money to meet payroll and to pay rent and things like that. And so it really is an emotional. This is a really emotional way to run a business with this passion. It is what the human is meant to do. It's what we're meant to do. We're meant to love and care for one another, and we can do it through commerce, which Adam, you have a million stories in your book about how people do it. And you mentioned that there's always a ripple effect to this kind of business, which is when you're investing, other people are benefiting too, not just their businesses. And I know my partner and I have spent a lot of time with Meghan and her team, and they're unusually amazing people, just culturally, and it's because Meghan leads in that way that's no longer commoditized based, but it's a leadership that's infectious, that's transparent, but with the people that you feel safe with, and so yeah, it's an incredible way to do it. It's not magical. So I don't know if y'all want to talk about how hard it is.
Yeah, I do want to talk about how hard it is. Because I'd say the number one thing that frustrates me with the title, The Passion Economy, is how many people say to me, oh, you have that idea that you just do whatever you like and you'll make money. Oh, if your passion is puppetry, just go and be a puppeteer and you're going to get rich.
Don't be a puppeteer.
Or
you
do.
Yeah, but
and
just
niche your audience.
Yeah, niche
Right.
your audience to one billionaire who really likes puppetry.
Right. I mean, that's see, one
Yeah.
client. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about because at the end of the day, you need a passion. You need there to be an audience out there who shares that passion. So if your passion, I remember I have a buddy who is a experimental music composer who specifically wanted to compose music that nobody would like. And he was genuinely frustrated that he didn't have a more successful career. And I was like, I think I have a theory why. Now, by the way, I will just mention, I grew up in subsidized housing for artists in Greenwich Village in New York. I grew up literally, the only adults I knew were broke artists, which is why I became a business reporter, because nobody cared. And personally, I'm fine with that choice. We're not saying you can't make that choice, but that is a choice. The choice to do the thing you're passionate about without worrying about the market. Sure, I will say it's a little tough on kids to grow up with that kind of financial instability, which is why I'm not doing that, although I love my parents. It was a little scary at times. So talk to me about the hard stuff, and let's try and not make it boring, but the boring stuff. You do, at the end of the day, you do need to do some accounting if you're going to run a business, right? The P's have to be bigger than the L's.
That's right. Yeah. Well, and I know, so we'll have 20 minutes coming up here left pretty soon, and we have some great questions too. So I want to make sure,
Yeah.
you know, and of course this is an audio podcast. For those listening on audio, we're going to take some live Q&A here too. So I don't know. Do you want to, Meghan? You want to talk about the past 2 years?
I think last night at dinner we were virtually in tears, Jason and I, and what we did realize was thinking about doing this podcast 2 years ago, we've eaten a lot of humble pie between now and today, because passion is probably the only thing that didn't shut our doors at the end of the day. We had a lot of clients who changed completely their business models. We had a lot of clients not be able to sustain a pandemic within their businesses, and the empathy and passion held us together with glue to get us through this past 2 years. Now, was it pretty? Absolutely not. But at the end of the day, there was this moment of, I think even now when we're sitting up here, it's great to not think of your clients or the people that you serve or the employees that you have surrounding you as transactional. And the idea that we all need humanity back again, it brings that sort of passion back into what we're doing and how we do commerce. But it wasn't easy, and I think even more importantly, a lot of people may be thinking in their minds today, all right, the passion economy, I gotta find my passion and I gotta figure out how to make profit on it. And it could be the great reckoning for all of us to kind of decide, what does that look like, and can I make money on it? And just thinking through, well, what are the tools that you have provided in the book, or Jason, you've lived and showed that there is a way, there's a nexus between passion and profitability. There truly is, but it isn't pretty. It's not pretty.
No.
No.
And I think that what we were talking about at dinner is that you and I got to be in Adam's book, which is a big privilege.
Yeah.
And we learned a lot through the things we've gone through. But the past 2 years were, they were gut-wrenching personally and professionally in a lot of different ways for everybody, and a lot of that was psychological and mental, and we went through that, and we struggled. I mean, it's hard, I don't want to be on a stage and think we've got it figured out. Nobody's got it figured out.
Absolutely
we don't
not.
have it figured out. Nobody's got it figured out. And so, but that's okay. It's okay. You don't have to figure it out, because, the journey is a big part of what we do. And the journey's been just really difficult the past 2 years. And so we wanted to also, just try to be encouraging too, that we might have, there were many opportunities, right, Meghan, for us to shut our doors, actually, even through the pandemic. We struggled with team and clients, and the world was just acting weird because they didn't know what to think, right? And so the only thing that really had us keep going was just a desire for what we'd already experienced, which is the intimacy of being with people and serving them, seeing them transform, seeing the things we do for them then change other people, even though we were struggling too, helping people struggling while we're struggling, going, you can do this. And we're like, I hope I don't close my doors tomorrow. And so it was probably never that bad for us, but it's a heavy, I think, I guess, Meghan, we've talked about entrepreneurship as a pretty heavy weight to bear, but it's worth it.
It's worth it.
Because of what we get to see and experience. We just have to go to some of those gut-wrenching places, and you've started and run businesses, and it's just
including
emotionally...
businesses that have failed.
Yeah.
Although what I will say, I mean, and this is certainly not original to me, the defining feature of most Western economies in the last 30, 40 years is you've heard the hollowing out of the middle, maybe, that phrase. And sometimes that's referring to individuals. So actually, what's interesting, because you might hear like the middle class has disappeared, what gets lost in that is more people moved up than down. It is true that there's fewer people right in the middle. About 2/3 went up, about 1/3 went down. But the third that went down way farther. So on average, it went down, if that makes sense. And another way some people talk about it is the barbellification of the economy and of industries. And you see this in banking and accounting and advertising, where the perfectly fine middle of the road company or person that is really risky. You do have to run to the edges. Either
for sure.
Big scale, try and get that job at Ernst & Young or whatever, the big giant accounting firm, or to intimacy. Mm-hmm. And I certainly see that in my industry of journalism, where when I started in the early 90s, it was not entirely unlike joining the post office. I worked in public radio, I worked at the New York Times, worked at the New Yorker, and I was sort of towards the end of what had been a century in which once you pass through a few hoops, by the time you were 25, 27, you were sort of on a path, and you probably could guess at 25 what your salary would be on your 63rd birthday. And these were mostly union jobs. Being a superstar and being a real lame-o, you probably made around the same. And that system has, if not fully, it's largely collapsed. And there's now I have lots of friends, like public radio friends, who are podcast multi-millionaires. And I have a ton of friends who I started with who have left the profession and are doing worse. And so when we talk about how hard it is to embrace the passion economy, I'd also like to point out it's also really hard not to embrace the passion economy.
True, yeah.
The economy just is less certain, harder. And for me, for my money, I would take building the mastery not only of your skills, your product and service that you provide, but also the business context around them. And I think when I talk to like a younger journalist today, it's a lot of work up front, but once you have that mastery, and once you realize that building business models can be as creative and fun and playful as it just empowers you to embrace this economy. Anyway, shall we go to there's some really great questions.
Well, I know I guess the last thing was Meghan talking about really things we wanted to talk about, because I mean, accounting is a commodity, but almonds, that's a real. So Meghan has she has really taken the mastery of turning a commodity into a value, and so I know we were going to.
Oh, well, we just were talking. I mean, you even said it this morning, Adam. Everything could be a commodity, right? Every single thing essentially could be a commodity, and what I've sort of envisioned over the past 6 years, and the model that we think of at Honey is, if we layer on this like thickness, I kind of like think of it as passion, on top of the commodity, it's packaged differently. So that nut can have a much more impactful story if you learn about the farmer or the terroir that it's grown on or how it's packaged. So that passion that we add to the commodity creates more value. And so we're paying that's sort of what we're paying forward with our clients. They can come to us and they are extremely passionate about tortillas. We have an amazing tortilla client, and they source the most incredible local corn, and they are family owned for 160 years. Guess what? Nobody knew that. They just saw a package on a store in Safeway in the middle of, all the layers of packaging, and they just became a tortilla. But really, when we started to think differently and layer in that passion and that storytelling, which Adam has been that's definitely something that we've added into this conversation, it becomes a different value proposition for the consumer. And there's many levels to get to that end result of a valuable commodity. It's not just like getting it into your hands and into your table. You have to educate the stores who are putting it on the shelves. You You have to, so there's many levels of education that keep adding on that padding of passion. And at the end of the day, then, you are more likely to say, wow, that tortilla packaging has this there's much more to it. It's gorgeous. I'm learning more about their story, and I'm totally okay spending 75 more cents on something that I'm proud of to put at my table. Because then it even pays more forward, because you sit at the table, and then you're more likely to tell your friend across the table, these fucking tortillas are really good. Like, do you know the corn is from this farmer? And so it becomes, the pay it forward model and the passion economy model goes all the way down the line from producer all the way down to the friend that you just sat at the table with.
I love that. I mean, and I love the idea that we can live in a world where the things we touch and just the consumer products we buy, the food we buy, but also the businesses we interact with. I just imagine think of all the things in your life that are commoditized that you don't have any particular feeling about, and imagine it was something cool, something where you knew something about who made it and how they made it and you cared. That feels like a richer, better world.
Yes.
And I look at my son who's 10, and he doesn't think of media as a thing where there are 3 channels and that, everyone here I'm 51, anyone else is 51, we have all the same favorite shows from 1978. And my son doesn't even have the same favorite, he doesn't even know what his friends are watching because there's so much richness. I like that, I find that cool. All right, let's get to Q&A.
Q&A, huh?
There's
All
some
right.
great questions.
Some great
so,
questions.
I'm not good at technology.
All right, so value-based pricing, this is Andrew Tucciarone. Value-based pricing is great. My question is, how do we convince large legacy clients that it's better than hour-based pricing? That is, you might lose those large legacy clients, right,
Yeah.
Jason?
Yeah. Well, I mean, client replacement becomes a strategy of growth at some point. If you're trying to switch, instead of sometimes convincing what we call legacy-based clients, ones who have already adopted a certain method that actually you taught them, you can't convince them to adopt a different one often. So you have to replace them and then move them out of the company, typically as part of the strategy. So
Another strategy would be to show 2 different options of proposals. One that is a hourly option in which it becomes transactional and they're looking by the hour, or a very all-inclusive model where they feel like it's totally okay to pick up the phone and talk to a partner that's helping them. And I think that's sort of one of the things we did was you either get us and you get us completely to help you get to where you need to go, or you get this. And then this became non-existent after.
And there's firms, I talk in the book about Wright and Ray, I forget the name, Ray Ward in North Carolina, an ad agency, and they basically became 2 separate companies. I mean, it was the same office, but they had 2 separate websites, and they basically had their legacy business, and they weren't adding any customers, but they were keeping those customers. And then they had the new business, which was focused and niched on the furniture upholstery world. And just over time, the legacy business died away and the new business thrived. All right. Allison Ensminger asks, she's an artist. She wants to create a social presence to get incoming work. And she's worried about that she might only attract other creators. How do you put things out there to attract the audience you want? This is something I think a lot about, and I think that's a time to really be the most yourself, because you are gonna, I mean, Jason, when you started tweeting about being a creative accountant, now you can look back and think, oh, that was smart of me. But it was weird, right? How many people necessarily are gonna want their accountant to be super creative?
So
Well, that's like, you're like, oh, am I going to go to jail for this?
And Jason has spent a lot of time in and out of jail. We should just get that on the table.
I'm always in and out of jail, so that's part of it. If you want to run a passion business, you're going to go to jail. No, I don't know. That's probably better for you, Megan. How do you decide who your audience should be when producing content, I guess?
I know, and I think naturally as an artist and as a designer, you're going to attract creatives first as your first level. I mean, I think that's great, and your peers are going to celebrate sort of what you're niching in. But I think the biggest mistake that could be made is that you forget the ask. Like really putting out, I am looking to work with these types of clients. And I truly believe it's great to just absolutely say what you're trying to attract. I want to work with XYZ. I want to work with strawberry farmers. I want to work with, up and coming cannabis work. Whatever it is, you have to say it or no one's going to know. They're just going to know the scope of work and services you could provide. So going back to audiences, that sort of, the passion economy calls for you to really refine your audiences and say that you're looking for them. So for instance, I may be a creative and I love being here at South by Southwest, but I spend a lot more time at ranchers and farmer conferences than I do here, which is something that, who's the one in pleather? They don't know who I am. So it is taking yourself into the audience in which you want to serve more often than not.
Yeah. I mean, a good sign that you've found your niche is you can actually identify specific people to reach out to, and that when you call them, you know what they're worried about. You can call them and say, you're selling a really special product that you see clear differentiation with, but it just goes on a supermarket shelf and it's a commodity. So just the ability to say that, you're already showing that you have an intimacy.
Absolutely.
And Jason has a great podcast, and you talk a lot about win without pitching. There's a whole universe of ideas around how you communicate so that by the time you're having that conversation, it's almost like, obviously you're going to hire me, because who the hell else are you going to hire? All right, this is a great question. When Jason says you can never niche too deeply, does that only work in the US? Or can that work if you're from a country that is a much smaller local market? This is something so in the book, I have a chapter about an Amish-owned business that makes horse-drawn farm equipment for Amish people. And there's roughly 400,000 Amish people in the US and Canada. These days, fewer than 10% of them make their living farming. So this horse-drawn farm equipment company's market is 40,000 people, roughly. The average Amish family makes about $30,000 a year. So you might think, wow, is that a terrible market? They make millions, and they have 5 major competitors who also make millions. And you might think, how could that possibly be? But they are selling major capital expense products. So if you decide, any of you want to become Amish farmers, talk to me. I can help hook you up. You're going to be spending a few $100,000 on farm equipment. And if 100,000 times 40,000 people, you're talking about a market of billions of dollars. It starts making sense. There could be 6 companies really thriving in that market. Now, those are big ticket items. I don't know that I also met a guy who he sells socks to Amish people. He's not doing as well because those are low value markets. And I have a lot of really good Amish friends. They are cheap. When it comes to good farm equipment, they'll spend $1, but not for socks.
Not on socks.
Yeah. And so, it's an interplay of price and market. But I'd say you would be shocked. I remember one of your clients, I think, was it your client, said, we focus on third-tier hospitals in third-tier cities doing their signage and marketing. And I was like, are there enough of those? They're like, oh my God, there's a ton of them. And do they have specific needs? And they walked me through, yeah. If you're the big hospital, you have one set of needs. If you're the second hospital, you have a different set of needs. If you're the third hospital, you have a whole different set of needs. And if you're the expert on that, and you've picked a niche that's big enough that you can really run a business, but small enough that no big ad agency's ever going to focus attention on it.
And going back to sort of the idea that what is wrong right now about sort of living the passion economy is, for those of you who are in the arts and creative industries, the RFP process. And I think we have to change that model, and it's something that I will advocate and talk all day about, because going back to the large hospital, they're going to have an RFP that is transactional, that doesn't really care about someone who is thinking through signage and wayfinding in a way that may upend what is expected and traditional. So right now, we're still in the process of RFPs going out that don't celebrate ways in which creative thinking can come into play, or a change in which innovation can really change the way people think about an engagement and scope of services work. So it kind of sucks because RFPs are usually the big ones. They're the ones that are they're putting out an RFP with a large dollar amount, and it is really hard to actually win that with a passion economy mindset, especially if you're looking at state and government work. So that's just something I would say as we think about this idea is there's still barriers of entry with it, and barriers of entry that will financially hurt you, which is true.
And that's something Ben Liner asks about, the passion economy and income inequality, which is a question I get a lot, and it's something I think a lot about. And I would say certainly that third of middle-class people who are lower, this is a privileged thing to do, but it's not as privileged as people think. So and I deliberately in my book, I didn't want I went to Harvard, then I went to Stanford Business School, and then I took over my dad's VC firm. I didn't want that model. And I would say, and these two are really good examples of, this is something that, you got kicked out of not kicked out of. You graduated from junior college.
Yeah.
No.
I didn't get kicked out. That would have been a cool story.
That would have been a cool. Let's start
Take
telling
your
people you got
band
killed.
and get
No,
out of
but
here,
but
right?
this is something that that 2/3 of the middle class who went up. It might require having a safety net, which might mean worst case scenario you could sleep at your parents' place for a while. I do have people in my family who can't. And I know people who don't have any safety net at all, and I don't think this message is for them. But I also don't think this message is only for the 1% or only for the hyper-rich. I think it's for a wider group of people than that. It's probably, I was working with some economists at Harvard and MIT on developing some of the ideas, and we definitely said 20% of Americans, which is not, it's only 20% for sure, and probably a little bit more than that. But so it's optimistic for the kind of people who come to a live podcast at South by Southwest. It's good news, but it's not. This is not a panacea for all of the world's ills.
But there is inequity, for sure, with regards to this idea, because it has to start from the way the contracts are starting. That's my whole thought process, is we have to change the model so that more people can have better innovation and ideas when submitting proposals.
And we have a lot of institutions, health insurance just being one obvious one, that are mitigated against the passion economy and for another kind of economy, which is too bad.
Yes.
All right. Unfortunately, there's so many great questions.
many
I wish we had
questions.
another hour.
Yeah.
Do we get to continue to respond to these questions throughout the evening, maybe?
I guess we can chat.
Yeah,
back.
maybe
We'll
we
chat
can
back.
chat in.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you all so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.